1, 2, 3. Testing? Yes. The first hurdle is leaped. Got the microphone working. I'm here to introduce the speaker, Peter Adkison. He is already up on stage. Peter, welcome. Thank you. Hi, I'm Peter Adkison. Welcome to Ropecon. First of all, I want to say thank you to everyone in Finland for having me here, and all the Norwegians and Swedes and Danes and Germans and anybody else who came over the border. Thanks for having me at Ropecon. Finally, I'm delighted to be here. Yes, yes. Ropecon has a wonderful reputation in the United States because you have a long history of bringing over loudmouth Americans who then go back and tell about what a wonderful, awesome time they had here. And usually, within the first paragraph, they talk about the saunas. So, good job in promoting yourself with a nice sauna gimmick. And it's worked fabulously well. There's a long line of American game designers and publishers who are hoping to get invited sometime soon. So I'm finally glad it was finally my turn. I'm here with my lovely girlfriend, Dee Fenton, and we'll be playing nightly. No, we're not talking about the sauna anymore. We've moved on from that. Okay, so I have several panels this weekend. Tomorrow I'll be doing a panel on Gen Con specifically, called Gen Con Then and Now. I have some old pictures going clear back to the first Gen Con held in Gary Gygax's house back in 1967, all the way up to now. I have actually more old pictures than new pictures, funny enough. And then I also have a panel tomorrow evening. I think I forget the time. It's an evening sometime. Called Role-Playing Games as Visual Media. I'm a little nervous because I think that actually then here in Finland and the rest of the Nordic area, I have more to learn than to teach. So I probably will get bombarded with, oh, you should do it this way afterwards, which is exactly my goal. So I found it's a very effective technique to learn something is to go and try and present it. Then somebody will inevitably tell you how you should have said it. But tonight's panel, I am basically talking about the history of Wizards of the Coast. So in case you don't know, why am I qualified to discuss this? I started the company in 1990. And I was the founder, and I was the CEO for 11 years, from 1990 to 2001. And I still have a great relationship with the company. I think Wizards continues to be a fabulous company doing great things. I like to say it was built to last. And so I will only talk about the history of Wizards for the time I was there, which is originally, and kind of how it got started. I hope that you, like me, think it's interesting to hear the stories of the very beginning of something special. Like, how did something really interesting get started? And how did it... And at some point, it becomes less interesting because it has momentum and it has size and stuff. So I'm here to tell, like, how did something as big as Wizards begin? And what challenges did it encounter early on? How did we get through those challenges, or in some case just get our ass kicked, and survive and flourish up until and then I'll stop at the point where I left the company. So there is come on, oh, there it goes. Woo-hoo. I'm going to kind of cover it in two phases. Did that turn out? Oh, yeah, that looks good. Okay, so up through 1996, 1997 is the year we acquired TSR, and Dungeons and Dragons enters the picture. So up until that's a natural point for thinking of for dividing the company's story. So when did Wizards of the Coast get started? Well, it actually had a name long before it was a company. In 1981, I was in college. Early in college, and I was a big fan of Dungeons and Dragons. I played it constantly. I started playing in 1978, pretty much never stopped. And I had a couple of friends, Terry, Daryl, Ken. Terry had just purchased a Judges Guild module. Some of you might remember some of the old Judges Guild stuff. It was like some of the really gritty, cheap, easy, fun Dungeons & Dragons material that came out in the late 70s and early 80s. And very fond memories of just these big maps and real detailed descriptions like, a Medusa lives here. She has 30 gold. Okay, no story, no explanation, no why. Just next encounter, 5 were-rats. Next encounter, 3 elves. Okay, that sort of stuff. Anyway, so we just bought a module called The City-State of the Invincible Overlord, and we were oohing and ahhing over it. I thought it was awesome. And Terry said, we could make something like this. Isn't that how it always starts? Yes. I think every game company probably starts off with that exact phrase. We could do this, or better. And we had maybe a 10-minute conversation, and then we all agreed, well, maybe we should finish college first. Yeah, good idea. And then we didn't talk about it. That was it. It was this 10-minute conversation that I prized dearly. And I think it was in 1981. None of these dates may be accurate. Just my guesses based on a very fuzzy memory. So, but we started, but in that same conversation, another friend, Daryl, he had the idea for the name of the company, Wizards of the Coast. Now, we all played in another Dungeons & Dragons campaign. There's a lot of people in this story. And in this other Dungeons & Dragons campaign was a Wizards Guild called the Wizards of the Coast. And they were badass. I mean, and I don't know, there's something about the way the game master played this guild. If one of them showed up, you were in trouble. That's just the way it was. And you could tell how much trouble you're in by how many stars they had on their shoulder, right? And so he said, yeah, we call it the Wizards of the Coast because they're bad. And we're like, yeah, and we live on the West Coast. So, yeah, okay, that sounds good. That was as much discussion as there ever was about the name of the company, Wizards of the Coast. So, in the next 9 years, what happened? I mean, we finished college. Ken and I both started using the name Wizards of the Coast for various things that we had just as hobby. Like I made a game that around 1983 or 1984 where I just photocopied it at the library. It was a game to do miniatures, doing big scale warfare and fantasy, like something on the scale of World War II, right? But in a fantasy world and rules for that. And I put the Wizard of the Coast logo on it. He did a wedding invitation once, and using some graphic design program. Hey, come on, this is the 1980s. And put Wizards of the Coast on the back, and who knows what else happened in that period. But we just kind of had this thing that we had this idea for a company, and we didn't who knows if it was a pipe dream or what, but we do stuff. We put the name on it. And so then in 1990, my friend Ken was always very internet savvy, even before there was internet. It was back in BitNet, ARPANET days, where you would communicate by, 1,200 baud modems using college systems networked together and this sort of thing. We were both at work. I was working at Boeing, and he was working, I don't know where. And of course, instead of working, we were typing back and forth. We were chatting effectively on Telnet. And literally, as soon as I had the thought, I typed it, which was, we should start Wizards of the Coast. For real. There was a really long pause. like this is before AFK was invented. And then eventually he writes back, "You're serious, aren't you?" I go, "Yeah, why not?" And we spent the rest of that day. It was understood, by the way, that it would be role-playing games that we would do. Magic the Gathering is not going to enter the picture for a while. And so we should do role-playing games. And so what's a role-playing game? A role-playing game is a book. So to us, the whole problem of what you had to solve in order to be a role-playing game company was to figure out how to print a book. It wouldn't occur to us much later that we should think about things like marketing and sales, that stuff. It was just about how do you make a book. And neither one of us had ever made a book before, although Ken knew a little bit more about it than I did. So we just started like two intelligent human beings breaking it down. Well, okay, somebody's got to write it. Somebody's got to go through and check all the grammar, edit it. We're going to need art, so we got to find an artist, okay. Then it gets formatted somehow, like laid out, right? Yeah, okay. And book publishing was just starting to, desktop publishing was well on the way at this point. So we knew how to do that. We thought we did. And then somehow that information gets given to a printer, and they print it, and we get the books, and we're done. Or sale. Yeah, we have to sell them somehow. Okay, yeah, we'll have to figure that out. Okay, so that's what we did. We spent the afternoon typing up. We pretty much got it right. I mean, the two of us figured out how to make a role-playing book, and then, of course, we started telling all of our friends. And I was, which was basically everybody we played Dungeons and Dragons with, right? And we knew a lot of people, and so we just kind of sent a message out to everybody we knew. Hey, we're going to start a game company. If you want to help, show up Wednesday night at Peter's place. Okay, great. We probably had 20 people show up. I don't think it's that much different than running a game convention, right? So we had about 20 people show up, and we said, and we spent the first night. Let's just what could we do if we start a game company? What would we make, right? And we brainstormed a list. I wish I still had that list somewhere, but it's been gone for years. But we came up with a great list of all sorts of cool stuff. We were bouncing off the ceiling by the time we were done with that conversation. But the thing that came out of it primarily was that in our D&D games that we've been playing since the early 80s, well, we did a lot of what's called power gaming. I mean, we were in college, right? Soon out of college. So it really started in high school, that part of the story. And we had gone way past what all the D&D material had said. I think back in those days, the D&D rules went up to like 20th level. But we had stumbled across a book that was gold for us. I don't know, anybody here ever hear of the Arduin Grimoire? Oh, serious geek cred there. Okay. Their charts went up to 100th level. Yeah. And I think my favorite D&D book of all time was, and I still have my first printing, Deities and Demigods. Anybody remember that one first? And what was special about Deities and Demigods? First printing? Cthulhu. I'm sorry if you said the same thing. It was, yeah, okay, Cthulhu. It had the Cthulian mythos, the Nuon mythos, the Melnibonian mythos, and it had all these gods and told what magical items they had and what their special abilities were and everything like that. So we played tons of gods. Or wannabe gods. Most of our story arcs were how to become a god. And so we had to develop rules for all that, like how to become a god, what it meant to be a god, right? Like mechanically, not spiritually. We didn't care about that part of it. Just, what are your bonuses, right? What can you do as a god that a mortal can't? That's what was important. And so we really developed this whole system. And so out of all these ideas we came up with for what we should do with our new game company, we decided that that's the thing that we had that was the most interesting, the most innovative, the most new to the market. And so we started working on a product called the Primal Order, which would eventually launch as Wizards of the Coast's first ever product in 1992. So I wrote about half of it, and then 3 or 4 other people, my good friend Steve Connard, et cetera, wrote different pieces of it. And I thought it was a pretty good book, actually, for its time. We had, it's probably sold about 20,000 copies, which, in role-playing products isn't bad. It's not D&D, but hey. So we had this conversation like, how do you make a game? So we decided, okay, this is what we're going to do. I would say there was about a 2-week period there from that first meeting where this was all kind of a lark. But very quickly, I think I got very serious about it. Like, I said, wow, if I'm going to do a business, I need to know what that is. And so the idea of it being a hobby was very short-lived. And so, but I had no business background. I was raised very poor class. I was raised in a farmer's family on a Native American reservation but I'm not Native American, but my family was so poor they didn't own their own land. They farmed Indian land. And so it was kind of, so I did not grow up with a business sort of acumen or even an attitude of appreciating business. Rich people were the enemy. So I had a lot of learning to do. So I jumped in, started reading a lot of business books, got a lawyer, really bad one, unfortunately. We ended up making some really bad, costly mistakes, but I won't go too much into that, other than to say, get a good lawyer if you start a company. We started raising money. I think that goes in hand with, I feel like I always took Wizards of the Coast very seriously as a business after that first 2-week period. So I started working on a business plan while I was writing the Primal Order, while we were figuring out how to organize ourselves. And as you can imagine, a new company with a lot of young people, we certainly were not very efficient. There was a learning curve here, quite a steep one. But we got through it. Now, this timeline I put up here, some of these dates jump around. If I tell the story strictly chronologically, I have to kind of go back and forth between role-playing and magic. But if I do it by topic, then I got to back up a little bit. So, because there's some things happening in parallel here, and I put it this way because I think the timing of these things is kind of interesting, and the timing turned out to be very important for us in a couple of ways. So it really took us about 2 years to get the Primal Order to market. About halfway through that is when we started getting very serious about how do we sell this, how do we market this. We met somebody who we immediately fell in love with. And some of you have heard of Lisa Stevens of Paizo. Anybody? Eric Mona was here last year. His boss. Lisa Stevens was the first ever employee at Wizards of the Coast. And she was also the first person we ever brought into the company who had any background in the game industry. Before she came to us, Lisa was VP of Sales and Marketing at White Wolf. And we hired her right after the launch of Vampire the Masquerade, which was a very important point in time not only for White Wolf, but for the whole gaming industry. So Lisa came on, and when she came on, she said, hey, Peter, how would you, instead of launching with one product, how would you like to launch with 14 products? And I'm like, what are you talking about? So she said, well, I know this guy, and his name is Stephen Michael Secchi, and he did a role-playing game called Talislanta. And if anybody remember the Talislanta advertising slogan? Very good. No elves. Very good. Now, almost every creature in Talislanta had big pointy ears, though. But no elves. That was her advertising slogan. It worked. So she came on board and brought with her a whole product line. Now, that's a new employee for you. Always love hiring an employee who brings in revenue. So we that was about halfway through that period, and we were able to develop Talislanta, a new edition of Talislanta, in the same amount of time it took us to finish developing the Primal Order, which kind of speaks to some of the inefficiencies we had. Another very important person that joins the story at this point is that to do the Talislanta product, we really wanted to find a professional game designer because we really wanted to work on game design. Primal Order, we created our own system, but it wasn't a core system. It was a system that you would add to other role-playing games. In fact, we published conversion notes of how to play Primal Order with D&D, Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, I think was, maybe not, I don't know, Ars Magica, Hero, GURPS, Rolemaster, et cetera, et cetera. So, but to design a core system, we brought in an experienced game designer, and Lisa Stevens, of course, through her background at White Wolf and before that Lion Rampant, was good friends with Jonathan Tweet. Now, how many people know who Jonathan Tweet is? Okay, pretty good, pretty good. Yeah, so Jonathan Tweet is, in my opinion, one of the best game designers, at least on the role-playing side. His really old credits, like Ars Magica, Over the Edge, and then later credits Everway, and of course, eventually he'll write 3rd edition Dungeons and Dragons. But he also came in and did Talislanta for us, and so we were poised in 1992. The launch of Wizards of the Coast was these two product lines. And that, in 1992, really marks the commercial beginning of Wizards, in the sense of anything before that was just us coming up with stuff. And April 1992 was when we launched the Primal Order, and we're now a business. We're now selling stuff. We exhibited that year at Gen Con and at Origins, and we and the Gamma Trade Show we attended. We were in the industry, if you will. And there's water. So it turned out that we had very poor timing. We entered the market just as role-playing games were in a serious decline. Now, the game industry goes in cycles. It tends to, although I would say that for the last several years, we've seen kind of a nice, steady, positive sales increase in the U.S. in role-playing games, as opposed to most of the history of role-playing games has these cycles that go up, there's a big boom, and then something comes down, up, down. It would be nice if we're away from that now. But when we came on the market, 1990, 1991, role-playing game sales were really, really strong. And right before we came out, role-playing games just tanked. I don't know if it was a glut in the market. The one exception was Vampire the Masquerade, which wonderful, wonderful product to come into the market right before we did. And so when we came out with the Primal Order, in spite of getting great reviews, and also Talislanta, our sales were not nearly what we had projected, and it came into a difficult financial period. There was a point in January 1992, where we had nobody. We had been paying people very nominal wages, and we ran out of money completely. And I remember there was about a month, the beginning of 92, excuse me, 93. Because when Prime Warner Talismanic first came out, there was a nice little sales bump. It wasn't as much as we needed, but then what happens is the sales, after the initial release, the sales came down. We were coming out with expansions, but it wasn't really enough to keep the office, the company going. And so in going into 93, we were really, really broke. And I remember spending a month alone in the office, where I was the only one in there working away, and there was one very obscure Talislana product that we published. I pretty much did everything on it myself. So I wrote it. We didn't bother with editing. I art directed it. I did the layout. I did the print buying. I hired an artist to do the actual art. Everything else I did myself. Fortunately, something else, which if you're looking, you already know where this is going. Fortunately, if I would not have met Richard Garfield, that would have been the end of the Wizards of the Coast story. We had given it our best shot in terms of role playing. Didn't work out did okay, not that great. I think I would have just stayed working. I did this all the time, by the way, while I was working at Boeing. That was my day job, right? So I think a lot of you know the experience of having a day job and then doing something with gaming on the side. So I was not taking any income. I was using what revenue we had and investment money we had to hire talent where we needed it. So I think in my heart, I was always nervous about whether or not this was really going to work. And I'd kept my Boeing job. Well, fortunately, in the middle of this, I was always looking for new games to do, in spite of this great list of stuff that we wanted. I think that at some level I realized that if you didn't have Dungeons and Dragons, you really couldn't make money at role-playing. Not to foreshadow the next panel. So that was really nasty, wasn't it? But the world has changed, I'm sure. So I was always looking for something new, and I think I also had an intuition that what you really needed is a hit. I mean, you need something to come out like a Vampire the Masquerade, or a new Dungeons and Dragons, or a BattleTech, or something needed that would just catch on and make fire. So I was always looking for new games, new things to do, and not just role-playing games. Role-playing games were my first love, but I had very quickly decided that my obligation to my shareholders was more important than what types of games I happened to like. So I had switched to, whatever makes sense business-wise is what's first priority. So I was spending a lot of time back in those days let's see, I forgot it now. It's like proto-internet, rec.games.board.design. Usenet, thank you. Who said that? Somebody said that. All right, good job. I was spending a lot of time on Usenet, just as a way of promoting what we were doing and learning more about games. And I had made a comment that we were very open to game submissions, game ideas. So now let's back up. This is in 1991. So let me set up the story from Richard Garfield's perspective. Because Richard, first of all, I want to say Richard is one of the most amazing, beautiful spirits you ever meet. He is truly, truly amazing. If you ever get a chance to get him here, I highly recommend him. So he, at that time, he was in a PhD program for mathematics at University of Pennsylvania, back before the problems. Different department, in the mathematics department. And he had been an amateur game designer, designing games for fun since he was a child. When I met him, he literally had almost 80 games that he had designed purely for himself, just as an amateur. He had no interest in publishing them. Well, I mean, he was interested to the extent that if a game should just kind of magically get published, well, yes, woohoo! But he would tell me later, he never thought that being a game designer was a serious career choice, and that really being a mathematician was what he wanted to be. But he had a friend named Mike Davis, and Mike Davis, who was also a mathematician, a grad student with Richard, Mike felt differently. Mike looked at Richard and Richard's games and said, dude, you are amazing at this. I mean, your games are so cool that it would be a shame. And Richard said, well, I don't want to go through that whole process of pitching games and stuff like that. And so Mike said, I'll do that for you. If you give me an interest, because, these guys are mathematicians, so, Richard said, yeah, okay, if you can get, let's pick Robo Rally. That's our best game. If you can get Robo Rally published, I'll give you half of it. Whatever we get, I'll split it with you 50-50. Mike's going, oh yeah, that sounds great. So when Mike saw my post on Usenet, he responded to it and said, hey, I have a friend who's designed games, told me a little bit about Richard, and he's got this great game called Robo Rally. I'd love for you to take a look at it. And it's interesting because I remember reading this email, and at this time I was not willing to look at board games, and this was a board game. And I have to admit, what it was is I was intimidated by the complexity of board games. I didn't know people you could go to as sort of a turnkey solution for somebody who would do all the components and boards. I mean, it just, and then a box. I knew how to print a book. And I thought I might know a couple other things, but a board game, oh my God, just way too complex, right? But I've always been a big fan of academia. And I think at the time, I'd never had a graduate degree. I graduated in college. I got a nice four-year degree in computer science, which is great. Got me a good job at Boeing. But I always admired the doctorates, the people that got the PhD and masters. And Mike mentioned in his email that Richard was working on his doctorate, and that Mike himself had gotten his master's degree, and at very good universities. And I thought, I like knowing smart people. Because I've never considered myself really smart, to be honest. I mean, I'm okay, I'm happy to be where I'm at in the food chain, but I also know that there are people way smarter than I am, and every once in a while I meet them, and I'm just like, I eat it up. I just love how smart people are. And so I said, okay. I said, well, send me the game. We'll look at it. We'll meet. And it was because of that. And so they sent me the game. We played it. We loved it. I said, oh, it's great. And Mike said, hey, Richard and I are going to go out. We're going to be out of Portland, which is, if you imagine the United States, there's the left side and the right side. They were kind of from the right side. I lived on the left side. But Richard's parents were nearby over on the left side. So they said, hey, we're going to come out and see his parents. And I said, oh, I'll drive down. If you're coming all that way, I can go this far. And I went down to meet Richard and Mike. And I was kind of regretting the meeting because I knew what I would do was meet them and say no. And so I went down and met with them, and we had kind of an awkward conversation about Robo Rally. And I said, well, I like the game, but I don't know how to make a board game. I'm sorry. But I had this crazy idea in my head. I had been going to a lot of conventions, like science fiction, fantasy conventions, small ones. These are not so much game conventions, more the literary art conventions. I don't know if the parallel exists here, but Yeah, okay, they do, yes. One of those, yes. And so I would go to these conventions and I would see all this beautiful art. Well, now, go back to 1992, most of you, yeah, some of you are old enough. We didn't have in the game industry a lot of color art access. Most of the role-playing books back then were black and white interiors and a color cover. But there were no trading card games yet, obviously, because Magic hadn't come around yet. So there was a lot more cool art to be seen at these shows than what you could possibly see on the shelves of your local game store. And so I had thought, well, hey, now I'm thinking a little bit like an evil capitalist here, but like, I think I could get a lot of art cheap. Color art. And so when I met with Richard and I explained that I didn't really think I could do a board game, Richard said, Peter, I'll design any game you want. and with Richard, man, he is so charismatic. I mean, in such a pure and gentle way, and in such an intelligent way. Like when you talk to him, you feel like you're in the presence of like the Mozart of gaming. And he said, what? Sorry, didn't mean it. No, I stand by it. Mozart of gaming. So he said, I'll do any type of game you want. And I said, well, I actually had this idea for a card game, but just cards, because I can't deal with components. My head hurts. So just a card game with science fiction or fantasy art that people could play while they're waiting for their dungeon master to show up. Now, I am not at all trying to take any credit for Richard, because that is not the important idea behind Magic the Gathering. That is an incidental idea, that it's a card game, fantasy, or science fiction. But Richard, if he were here, he would say that game designers love having a box to play in, a sort of a design constraint, something that says, here, design a game that fits in this box. And rather than that being a limitation, a great game designer will consider that a framework, a foundation to know kind of which general direction. Because once you have a general direction, it's easier than just having a broad open canvas. So Richard said, okay. And this was on a Sunday. On Wednesday, he called me up and he says, I think I have an idea for you for a game. I said, oh, okay, cool. A card game? Yeah, card game. Mm-hmm. So he said, well, he said, like, is there any way we can get together? I could even come up to Seattle. And I said, well, hey, next weekend there's a game convention here in Seattle called Dragonflight. First game convention I ever went to, by the way, in 1985. And he says, okay, well, I'll come up. We'll go to the convention. We'll hang out, and I'll tell you my idea. It's like, okay, great. Come on up, right? Now, you're having conversations like this every week with different people, at this moment, of course, I have no idea how important this would be. And like life works that way, right? The key points in your life you don't often recognize while they're happening. Although I figured it out pretty quick. So, the next weekend, Richard comes up. I pick him up on Friday at the bus station, and and I said, okay, we got to go pick up Ken, the same guy, Ken McGlone, the same gentleman who I was in the initial conversations about starting Wizards of the Coast. And I said, okay, we got to go pick up my friend Ken at some place. And we pulled up. We were in this parking garage, and waiting for Ken. And so Richard says, okay, I have this idea for a card game. What if these cards are not like a regular deck of like 52 cards or however many cards, but what if the cards are like trading cards? And I'm like, what trading cards? Like baseball cards. Come in the foil and they're random. And there are hundreds, maybe even thousands. Oh, we could probably never afford to do thousands, but even hundreds of these cards, and they're mixed randomly, like baseball cards, and some of them are really common, and some of them are really rare, and like, okay, but you can play a game with them. Like, this sounds really cool. And he said, and so you could collect the cards, and you would figure out which of these cards to play with. And each player has, because each player would have their own deck. Like, what? What? Oh, each player have their own. Do you mix them together? No. You have a deck, you keep it over there. I have a deck, I keep it over here. And I've looked through my collection to figure out which cards to play, and you've done the same. And I don't know which cards you have. You don't know which cards I have. And then we play. Oh my, wow, that's okay. And I immediately knew it was an awesome idea. And of course, Richard knew it too. And we just started yelling, and we started whooping and hollering, like, "Woo! This is such a cool idea! This is amazing!" And we're like going in circles, and we're like, "Oh my gosh, wow, having so much fun!" And about that time, Kim comes across the street. And so Ken's like, what? And so and then Richard got to explain the whole thing again. And then all three of us are going, "Wow, this is cool." And it's echoing through the whole garage, And Ken said, "Wow, I bet we could sell 1 million of these, maybe even 2. A little later, I'll show you whether or not we hit that goal. So, then Richard's like, "Well, before you get too excited, this, I can't promise that. There's a whole bunch of reasons why this may not work. I mean, you gotta understand, we all take, nowadays, trading card games or collectible card games for granted. I mean, for most of you, these have been part of the gaming landscape for your gaming life, right? If you start gaming, let's say around 10, if you were born after 1983, they've always been there, right? Now, for some of us who are older, we remember them arriving on the market. So it may be difficult to picture and imagine what life was like. It's like imagining what life was like before the internet, right? It's like, how did you communicate? So, but we had to imagine every aspect of this product, and a lot of things that looked obvious to us now were nearly insurmountable challenges in 1992, 91, for a company with very, very little business experience and no money. And Richard said, like, "I don't know that I can design this game to be playable. I mean, if you could really pick whatever cards you want, I mean, who knows what the hell's going to happen, right? Like, as I got this idea, but I don't know if it's really going to work. And if it does, is it going to be fun, right? Because you can theorize about games all day long and debate them on the internet all day long, but at the end of the day, if the game's not fun, who gives a shit, So Richard was worried about that. And as excited as I was worried about having enough money to print it, enough money to buy the art, even though I'd said, "Oh, I think I could get art real cheap." It turned out not to be cheap. It turned out to be cheap up front, but we paid half of it in equity. and I'm very happy to say that those initial artists got paid very handsomely. But to kind of brush through a year of 2 years of really hard work from 1991 to 1993, in the Wizard of the Coast story, through everything that we were doing with Primal Order and Talismana, I mean, we knew this was an exciting idea, but we also knew that there was a really good chance we couldn't make it happen. So, like, in retrospect, you might ask, it'd be very fair to ask, Peter, as soon as you found magic, why didn't you just stop everything else? I mean, well, it's because we didn't know that magic would be possible. We didn't know that magic was going to be as big as it turned out to be. It was literally just another product on a line of products that we had hopes for. So we kept on doing what we were doing. And kind of the nature of magic is that those of us over here in Seattle, on the western side of the States, we're kind of working on all the role-playing stuff. And Richard really was doing, the first part of magic was him just doing all the work of designing it and developing it. There was, this 2-year period was mostly Richard working on getting the game right. Now, I say that, it only took him actually a month to design the rules for magic. And then it took about 1.5 years after that to play test it. But he when he came up with the idea in 3 days, and then came back to me with a playtest copy of the game in 1 month. And if you're a Magic player, how many people play Magic? Oh, wow. Warms my heart. If you as Magic players, if I gave you a copy, if I gave you a pile of playtest cards that he developed within the first month of the idea, and explained just a couple of things like W means white, B means black, U means blue, etc. And the interrupts are really the same as instants, but we didn't know it yet. You could play Magic with those cards. That's how well he nailed it within a month. I mean, he had this eureka idea, and he put it down on little cards and made a playtest game very, very efficiently. And so, and meanwhile, I went through all the struggles of developing role-playing games, launching them, having financial struggles. But as we're getting into late 1992, early 1993, realizing the company is in severe trouble and needing more money to survive, well, based on the results of our role-playing games, we were not able to raise more money. It's like, okay, you did something, it kind of flopped, so we're not going to, investors are like, why should we put more money? But with Magic, we were able to start showing Magic cards, and our art director, a guy by the name of Jesper Mirfors at the time, just did an amazing job of going out and getting art really efficiently. And we very quickly started building a presentation for investing money in Magic. And it's one of those things where most people at the time, now you look at it as like, how could you look at Magic and not get it? Right? It's amazing how many people looked at Magic and didn't get it. I worked so hard to raise money for Magic. At some point, I realized that after exhausting my friends and family and friends of family and family of friends and friends of family of friends, I think some of you know what I'm talking about. After exhausting that network and still needing more money, I started to go to other game companies, realizing that by asking a game company to invest, I was risking exposing, the golden egg or the crown jewels or whatever you might say. In other words, invest in this because we had this super cool idea. But this was very close to launch, and I knew that another game company would not be able to create the game as quickly and get it to market in the amount of time that we'd be able to do it because we were already well into production. And you'd be amazed at how many people in the gaming industry looked at it and said, this is stupid. and in fact, one of your former guests of honor is enough of a man that he has said it publicly, so I'll say it. Steve Jackson many times said, like this. But one individual who did immediately said, oh my God, this is going to be big, was Mark Reinhagen at White Wolf. and I always have a special place in my heart for him. He helped, White Wolf ended up helping to finance the launch of Magic the Gathering. Basically, they gave us ad space in White Wolf magazine in exchange for equity. So that was good. We got enough money together that we were able to put the down payment on the printing for Magic, the down payment, which was like a third of the print cost, right? We were printing at Cartamundi in Belgium. And I had no idea where I was going to get the other 2/3 of the money. But sometimes you just go for it, right? You just grab it and go. This was in April of 1993, May 1993. We get Magic. I could tell a whole seminar just about the horrors of getting Magic to market, but I'll just say it was a lot of work. I mean, nobody ever printed a trading card game before. I mean, like, and the technology then in 1992, 1993, you weren't used to dealing with the file sizes that you have, that you can deal with now. So you're doing full color separations of big card sheets of 121 cards, and the printers were confused because nobody had ever printed something like this before either. So some of those other challenges were figuring all that stuff out. Well, we did, and we got it to the printer, and still not sure is this going to really work or not. I mean, we think this game's cool, but is anybody really going to play it? Even at this late a date, we weren't sure. So I think it's now late June 1993. I am about to go to the Origins Game Convention. And that year it was in Dallas-Fort Worth, Texas. And it would go down in history as the lowest attended one, I think, since it started anyway. But boy, it was an important one for us that year. And I was literally almost on my way to the airport. I was literally collecting my luggage, and I knew that Magic was being printed and would be done in like another month, right? Well, I didn't realize that a big part of that time is all the packaging, and that. So when the printing guy called me up, Luke Mertens from Cartamundi, and says, "Hello, Peter, I have your cards, the first cards off the press." And I'm going, "You have Magic cards on? Oh my God! Yes, I want to see them. I'm on my way to the airport. Hey, I'm going to a convention. Can you just mail them to me to the convention?" So the very first time I saw Magic cards was at the Origins convention in 1992, and we had a booth because we were selling Primal Urn Talislana, and which had just launched. So I get these cards, and well, what's kind of funny is that the cards were not, the printer's just printing cards. There's no idea about commonality. I mean, they know for packaging about commonalities, but he just sent me kind of the same number of each card sheet. So I had the same number of commons, same number of uncommons, same number of rares, and the same number of land, by the way. So we just kind of split those up and built some decks. Those decks were interesting, we'll say. and we got very excited. So we eventually did, sort of, as the night wore off, figure out how to make some decent playable decks out of this. And then something very important happened at this convention. There was a small distributor at the time. It was not one of the big distributors in the U.S. market then were like the Armory, which later became Alliance, Chessex, Berkeley. There was a regional distributor down in the Southwest from Albuquerque, New Mexico called War Games West, which is kind of a retail store that had grown up to becoming a local distributor. And we were showing Magic to people at the convention. And this one guy comes by, and he's a sales guy for War Games West. And we're just demoing to anybody who will pay attention. And most people are just scratching their head. Literally, this was the typical reaction to Magic when it first came out, when you would show it to people. They would scratch their head and go, what? I don't understand. It was a really amazingly hard sell at the very beginning. But then there would be some people that go, this is pretty cool, right? So this guy, I think his name was Phil from War Games West, comes up and he says, yeah, okay, so I demoed this game, and he's like shaking his head and like, wow, that's pretty cool. It's like, okay, he wanders off, and a couple hours later, he comes back with the buyer. And I don't remember the buyer's name. I think, let's say Bob. He comes back with Bob. So they come up and say, hey, Bob, you gotta check out this game. So I do the whole demo of the game, and Bob and Phil, and these guys have big, the sort of the caricature of American Westerns, the really big, they call it the 5-gallon hats. These are not just cowboy hats. These are ones that, no offense, is a true story, that Mexicans would wear so they would look taller. I mean, they're really, really huge hats. And so they come back, and so I'm like, okay, Bob's like, that's pretty cool, right? So they wander off. A couple hours later, Bob and Phil come back. Now, each time, the next person they bring back is taller and has a bigger hat than the last guy. So they came back with Stan Sword, who was the senior buyer for War Games West. All right, let's see. What is this game you got here, son? All right. So I show him the game. And yes, there's one more iteration of this. They walk off. And about 2 hours later, they came back with Wayne Godfrey, who's the owner of War Games West. And the four of them, with increasingly bigger stature and increasingly bigger hats, come up. And I show them how to play Magic. And Wayne Godfrey said, let me take you to dinner. I said, okay. I'd never had a distributor take me to dinner before. I mean, we were so small, puny. So we went to dinner, and it was obvious that all these guys liked it a lot. And one thing led to another over dinner, and I saw my opportunity. And I'm like, any chance you guys would be willing to place a really big bet on this product? I mean, if I give you a bigger discount, you pay up front. You kind of got a bit of a scoop here, right? If you believe in it. And so Wayne said yes. And he paid, I think it was $40,000 up front. Which was about a third of the cost of the print run. So that solved about half of my remaining problem. And the rest of it came in, bits and pieces here and there, wherever it needed to be too. There was a magazine early in Magic history called Cryptech. Some of you might remember. Any other Geek Cred points out there? Anybody remember on magazine Cryptech? Sorry, Joanne, you're not remembered. Later, it was renamed Scry magazine. You remember Scry? Oh, there's a couple of hands. Okay, so Joanne also invested when she saw it, as I started talking more and more industry people. And the buzz started to get out there that maybe this game that this small company was working on was actually going to work. So the game, so the money secured. We didn't, and this kind of went in phases. We actually, the printing got done, got finished. They shipped the cards to Seattle. I didn't have enough to pay the entire bill, so I only got part of the product out of customs, and the rest of it was sitting in customs. It was, one of these crazy things where you're managing your cash flow very tightly. And I got I got some inventory, and I went on right before Gen Con of 1993. I went on the way to Gen Con, I went on a retailer promotional tour and this is just as we're starting to ship Magic to distributors. And it was interesting because I got to see firsthand, like day-to-day, Magic hit the industry, because it hit like really fast. Once the gamers got a hold of it, instead of all the people I was trying to sell to, which were publishers and people who thought they were gamers or what have you. Once real gamers got into it, they started just eating it up. And so I went to about 12 game stores, and the first game store, well, it happened to be in Portland where Richard's family lives, so his family all came. That was good. I think maybe one or two other people came. And then we went to another game store, and as I was going down the west coast of California, showing it at game stores, at first it was very discouraging. There weren't many people that would show up for our demos, because these have been advertised and stuff. But as I'm getting further down, more and more people are starting to show up. In that amount of time it took to do one store a day, Magic just started catching on like a virus. And it was a beautiful thing. By the time I got to Albuquerque and went to Games Workshop, War Games West, which I just said, they placed a big bet on this. So now I'm in their territory, and they have been promoting it like crazy. When I arrived there was 200 gamers at the store wanting autographs. They had a red carpet out. They had video cameras. And like, oh my God, I'm just this guy from the farm. What the hell's going on here, right? That was amazing. I think that's kind of when it hit me, like, oh wow. And then they had, of course, they had all these rules questions. And I forgot the camera was rolling, and I answered many of them incorrectly. And got no end of shit for that when I got back to Wizards, let me tell you. So, and then we were adding stores to the tour, and eventually I made it to Gen Con. Well, had a bunch of product coming in. Well, Gen Con is a 4-day show. It starts on a Thursday and ends on a Sunday. And so we show up Wednesday night, we're setting up our booth, our product's not there. I mean, we've really bet the company on this, right? Thursday morning, we go down. I mean, we got Talisman and Primal Order, but by this time, those product lines are pretty much dead. Thursday morning, no product. End of day, Thursday, no product. So one day gone. Friday morning, product's still not there. And people are starting to come by and ask about this game, Magic. The buzz was there. And then Friday afternoon, only a couple hours before the exhibit hall, about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, we get the word, because I had somebody stationed back there just watching for the delivery truck. We get the word, Magic, it's here. So we all go rushing back, and they leave one person at the till, and we all go back there. Half a dozen gamers just jumped in and helped us. I mean, because wouldn't you do the same? I mean, I would do the same. I mean, this is what gamers the world over are the same. People ask me how I like Finland, Ropecon so far. I love it, but it's not. But everywhere you go, our community is a loving, fun, wonderful, beautiful community. It is. And it's a real pleasure to be here and many of the other places that I've had the privilege of going. So yeah, so gamers were jumping in. We go back. We get all this. We come back with all these boxes. People are clapping, and then we sell to like the 20 or so people that knew about Magic from our road tour and stuff. We sell them some product, and they all leave, and then everything kind of gets kind of mellow, right? They got their fix. Not that many people knew about it. It's Friday afternoon. And then so now you're in hard sell mode. Everybody comes up, you do a demo. It's not an easy game to demo. And people are like, okay, so now let's see what. I need a starter deck, but if I'm going to play with somebody, they need a starter deck, so we have to each buy a starter deck? Yeah, that's right. Well, that's a ripoff. But, okay, we'll do it. So you start selling a starter deck at a time and so on. Then the next day, Saturday comes along. Then everybody who bought the previous day comes up, and I remember this, everybody comes by and says, oh my God, we played that all night long. Wow, what a game. Now, what were those booster packs you were talking about? So, yeah, give me a couple of those. Yeah, okay, yeah. Now I can just mix those in here. Right, yeah. And try taking out the cards you find you don't like. Oh, yeah, okay. And okay, okay. And so people are starting to catch on, And then Sunday, people are coming by. Hey, can I just buy a whole box of those things? Sure. No problem. And we actually had some inventory left, but the distributors came by and bought all the inventory we had left, which was a third of our whole print run. We'd been very aggressive. So we sold out. We flew home Monday. Tuesday, we go in the office, and our fax machine is jammed. Fax machine. It's we used this back in the olden days. It's we had what happened, and this is one of the great things about Gen Con or a big convention. What happened was that people really from all over the United States, especially, but really the world even, came, saw this game, and then they go back home and they go to the local retailer and say, hey, you got any Magic? And the retailers are going, what the hell is Magic? Hey, it's a card game. Okay, Magic Gathering. Wizard of the Coast. Oh, we know Wizards. That small little company that does Talismanic. Yeah, okay. They call their distributor. We need some Magic. And a couple of the distributors are going, what's that? But, of course, the distributors figured it out really fast when so many of their stores are asking for it. And so, literally, the Monday, literally, that's how fast this all worked in pre-internet days. The Monday after Gen Con, we got orders for another third of our inventory that we'd printed. And I quit my job at Boeing. So let's do this. Whoops. Oh, what did I just do here? In millions of dollars, our 1992 revenue was 0.1, or $100,000. In 1993, we came out with Magic, and in August, and by the end of the year, had sold $2 million. So my friend was true. He said we might sell 1 million, maybe even 2. And he was right. I think he was thinking lifetime, but about 5 months. 1994. One more time. Magic grew really, really fast. And obviously it wasn't just in the States. It took off in Europe literally days later. It took off in Japan. By 1996, a third of our sales were in Japan. Now, this was a very interesting sort of thing. Never would have thought Japan would be almost as big a market as the U.S. was. And it was as big as Europe. Now, later, that would change, unfortunately. But, so, wow. It was the rapid growth that happened in this time is just crazy. Anybody that studies business will know that growing in 2 years from $2 million to $127 million in revenue is just insane. I was actually incredibly depressed during this time. This is a time where, it should have been the best days of my life, but I was overwhelmed. I had no idea about, remember my background earlier. I had no business background. And I was trying to be good at business. I was hiring business people into the company, trying to sort the smart business from the bullshit, because you get a lot of that in corporations, as some of you may know. And it was really, really hard. I felt a great weight of responsibility to do a good job for Richard and for the other shareholders. And we were doing a great job. But I think the people who were smart enough to know that we were doing a really great job probably didn't want me to get big-headed. So nobody told me we were doing a great job. but we were. And so in 1995, I actually went back to school and got my MBA, 1995-1997, in business. And because I was tired of people knowing words that I didn't, like balance sheet. assets, income statement, just this sort of thing. And the company continued to do really well. I think the last thing I want to mention on this phase of Wizards history was there was a very sad note to this. In 1994, realizing that Magic was selling, in the 100 million range or getting there, and that role-playing games had peaked in 1992, we canceled all of our role-playing products. We just stopped doing role-playing, and it was very, very hard for us, at least for some of us who were real lovers of role-playing, who had started the company to do role-playing. But it was absolutely the right decision to make at the time, and the history of the company was full of decisions that were, oftentimes the right decision is not the easy decision. So. This is kind of the midpoint. Well, it's going to be more than the midpoint because I have less time remaining than time so far. But there's also my favorite part, really, in the new company. Before I go on to the next part, does anybody want to ask a question about the material we've covered so far? Yes, sir. Right. Right. Okay, so the question is sort of how quickly did we start to understand the collectible aspects of the game, if I could rephrase, and like decisions like black border versus white border and so on. This is something I can't point to a single point in time. This was a very complex part. Now we all understand how trading card games are done. You do a starter game and you do expansions and all this stuff. We had no idea what the structure of a trading card game would be at the time. So we had to design all that and dealing with rarity questions. And we weren't really avid collectors ourselves. It's not like we came out of baseball, sports cards, and we're now just applying that knowledge here. We were kind of trying to figure it out. So we were acutely aware of collectability issues, that collectability was important from the very inception. In Richard's first, the woohoo meeting, we were talking about collectability from day one. We certainly made some mistakes along the way, but I would say it was a matter of iterating and learning all throughout the process. I'll take one more question and I'll go on. You, sir. Well, to our knowledge, the people that knew how to print trading cards in the U.S. were all sports card companies who could do their own thing. And we didn't know these companies. And now later we would find out this wasn't totally true, but our understanding at the time was that these companies would not print for other people. A couple of them actually would have. The other thing that we were worried about was that if there was anybody who would immediately recognize the potential of this format, it would be a sports card company. We were deathly afraid of sports card companies coming out with a trading card game concept like Magic very quickly and just blowing us out of the water. It never really happened, actually. So we were nervous about that. And then we met Cardamundi, again, through White Wolf, Mark Reinhagen. I had explained to him the printing challenge, and he said, oh, I know the perfect guys. This guy is in Belgium. And it was at Gen Con in 1992 that Mark introduced me to Luke Mertens at Cardamundi. And as soon as I met him and he said, yeah, I solve all your problems, I really stopped looking. Because, there's a lot of things to do when you're the CEO. And, it's like, okay, problem solved, next problem, right? So that was it. All right. I don't even know what's next on here. Let's see, find out here. Okay, so now we get into, so let's lead up a little bit to this. Magic, I would say by about 1996, we had the Magic business really wired. I mean, we figured out. We launched in 93. I would say it took us 3 years to really get good at it. we'd had big speculation problems in 93 and 94 with rarities, and the beginning of 95, we repositioned Magic from being primarily about collecting to being about organized play. And we realized that the whole collecting, speculating thing was kind of a dangerous ride. Like, as soon as people figure out that they're not going to, triple their money by buying Magic cards and reselling them on the internet, as soon as people figure that out, then what's going to happen to Magic if Magic is primarily identified as a collectible? So we kept all the collectability aspects. We kept respecting collectability, but we said we need to promote this. We need to put something else out there for everybody to hang their hat on and say, this is what Magic is. And so we very fast, and I'm really proud of this because it was one of the best things. This was one of the things that we did smart. Not me. I just said, yeah, that sounds good, and blessed it. But Rick Aaron, Scaff Elias came in and said, this is what we got to do with the company. We got to do a brand repositioning. Oh, I knew that because I was going to business school. We got to do a brand repositioning from a collectible to an intellectual sport. And we're going to adopt a whole sports marketing model around Magic. It's all going to be about competition. And I have to admit, as a role player, I'm not going to say that I love this idea as a gamer right off the bat. I was kind of one of those old school Magic players that liked to play Magic more for fun than kicking somebody's ass. But it was absolutely the right thing to do. And so we repositioned Magic as an intellectual sport very, very quickly and started doing a sports marketing model with competitions and ranking systems and rating systems and qualifier, Pro Tour events, put in $1 million a year in Pro Tour prize money, and did a magazine to promote the players, everything as if we were marketing baseball or basketball or something. And it worked really good, and we started making a lot of money. And so what happens when a company starts making a lot of money and has sort of figured out its core business? Well, what happens is that I had raised a lot of money through investors. I had a lot of friends and family who I had exchanged stock for services with, employees with stock options. By the end, I had a very small percentage of company, only 2%. That's how much of it I had distributed to other people. And so what happened is that as the company got bigger and bigger, people started getting out their calculators and figuring out how much money they were worth. So, I've got 5% of the company, and the company's worth, $100 million. I'm worth $5 million. And so people started asking, and then people were happy about that for a while, and then people were like, well, how do I spend? Well, you can't spend your equity in a company. You can't write a check against that. So it's like, okay, people are figuring out that they're worth money on paper, but they can't spend it. So what happens is that a company's position has a lot of pressure to do what's called a liquidity event. Liquidity being a fancy word for you being able to convert your stock into money so you can go spend it. And there's a lot of different, the consultants, believe me, I talked to a lot of them, will give you all sorts of advice on how to do that. But really it comes down to going public or selling the company or doing a management buyout. And so we started realizing that we needed to do something like this. We weren't sure what the answer would be. But from about the period of 1996 on, it became clear from the owners of the company, my shareholders, that my top priority as a CEO of the company was to figure out how to have a liquidity event for the company. And so, and in all those solutions, whether it's going public or IPO or whatever, is to really maximize the value of the company, you have to show a record of increases in sales and profits. You have to grow. This is the dark side of business. Sorry to unshelter you from this horrible realities. But it all became about, okay, it's great that we're doing what we're doing, but what have you done for me lately? Where are you going? How do you grow this business? And how far will Magic really go? Is it really going to keep growing? Or is it actually, it wasn't. It started declining a little bit. big disaster. We had to really figure out how to get around that. So we became very acquisition-oriented. We started buying companies. And we bought a couple small ones, Five Rings Publishing Group, Gamekeeper, a couple other things here and there. But, of course, the companies I really wanted, and I had told my board this, I said, well, the company that would be awesome to get would be TSR, the publishers of Dungeons & Dragons. Because, the big, or Games Workshop. Because the top 3 products in the industry were Magic, Warhammer, Dungeons & Dragons. So, and we had a lot of cash. And so we started being very courteous, if you will, to these companies and trying to woo them. And my initial overtures were rejected in both cases. But fortunately for us, unfortunately for them, TSR found itself in very difficult financial position in early 1997. There are a lot of reasons. I think that they were not willing to accept being overtaken, if you will, and bet too heavily on a couple products in order to try to be competitive against us. I think that's really what it was. And then they made some mistakes in some of their contracts with their printer and with their book distributor, and they got incredibly overextended as a company. And they essentially ran out of cash and had no ability to borrow cash, had no credit to borrow cash, and their printer had all their files and wouldn't print for them without more cash. It wouldn't release the files for somebody else to print with them. So they had no ability to generate new revenue. And so they ended up in sort of a cash flow meltdown. And one thing led to another, and eventually I got invited to the party. And it was set up by Ryan Dancy, who was doing his own thing, Five Rings Publishing Group back then. He gave me a call one day and said, "Hey, I've got a chance to buy TSR, but I need to raise something on the order of 30 or 40 million bucks, and my investors are skittish. They want another investor." And I said, "Well, Ryan, if we're in this deal, then we're buying Dungeons & Dragons, not you." And Ryan's like, "Well, would you hire me afterwards?" I said, yes. You bring me Dungeons & Dragons, I will hire you. And buy your company, too. So sparing a lot of details, a lot of rounds of negotiations, we ended up buying Ryan's company and TSR in May of 1997 for around $36 million. Most of that was debt. And it was, I think, a really good investment because it really changed Wizards of the Coast from being the Magic company to being a game company. With Magic and D&D under one roof, it became very, very exciting times at Wizards. There were a lot of wonderful stories around. Imagine what it would be like to have come from a simple background, to have played Dungeons & Dragons your whole life, and then all of a sudden you get to buy it. I'm not going to lie to you. Wow, that was so cool. That was the height of everything. I love Magic, but I'm just the guy that published it. Richard designed Magic, but in a lot of ways, buying TSR and acquiring Dungeons & Dragons and then 3rd edition Dungeons & Dragons was for me a very personal project. I ended up being very hands-on with the development of 3rd edition, but I'm getting ahead of myself. So there are some great stories from the acquisition of of Dungeons and Dragons. And, well, I probably should be careful which ones I tell. I think one of the best parts was just going out there. I had never been to Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, where Dungeons and Dragons was born. I went out there. Gary Gygax was still alive then, of course. I got a chance. I would go out. He wasn't involved. He hadn't been involved with Dungeons and Dragons in many years. And I didn't really know anybody at TSR. So when I was going out there doing all the work of onboarding the company and meeting people and stuff, sometimes it can be hard when you're the boss to go mingle with employees. I mean, it's not nobody wants it to be that way, but it can be. There's a strangeness or an awkwardness, like, oh, let's go hang out at the bar. Okay, sure. So I would find myself over at Gary's place, and we played war games. And there some very special times there. One day I went into the office right after we'd made the deal. I like this story a lot. I, of course, knew who everybody in the company was, but I hadn't met everybody yet. And I thought, okay, this is the weekend after the acquisition was finished. And I thought, okay, I'm going to go in on the weekend and see if anybody's around, because, this is before everybody worked from home on their computers. This is like if you wanted to work, you had to go into the office. So you could kind of tell, what's the buzz level here? Is people excited enough that they're coming in on their off hours to finish projects or not, right? And I walked through mostly empty building. Now, to give their credit, a lot of TSR people had been designing games and not being able to publish them. So there was a nice backlog of stuff. But I found this one room back somewhere, and there were two guys in there, and I didn't know who they were, right? But I knew I hadn't met anybody, and so I poked my head in there, and all right, who are you guys? And they're like deer in the headlights. And as Rob Lazaretti and Dennis Kauth, and they said, "Oh, we're the cartography department." Now, cartography, I remembered being the first time I'd ever saw the organizational chart for TSR, that there was a cartography department, 2 people, and I remember going, "Wow, you need 2 people full time just to draw maps?" But then I thought about it, I'm like, yeah, okay, Dungeons and Dragons, there's a lot of maps. You got the overland maps, you got the dungeon maps, you got the town maps. Like, okay, 5 artists, 2 cartographers. Yeah, okay. So I went in and it's like, hey, what, they're like, yeah, we're the cartographers. And I'm like, oh, cool, because I got to tell you, I always love maps, right? So I was like, okay, what? Show me what you're doing. And I just told him, I love maps. I just love, oh, this stuff's so cool. It's stuff. I was like, I got my own D&D campaign, and I just always wish I could draw good maps because it would really make my world come alive. And they're like, oh, man, we'll show you how to do it. I'm like, oh, no, I can't draw. No, sit down. We'll show you how to do it. They were so friendly and immediately sat down and put pens in my hands. And so I spent the whole afternoon there with these 2 guys and them showing me how to draw maps. I don't know, it's a simple story. It's one of my favorite stories of my entire career. Sitting there, drawing maps with these 2 guys who insisted that I could learn. And I did. I draw pretty good maps now. They did a good job. So we moved the company out to Seattle, TSR, from Lake Geneva. It was a very big emotional thing. And almost everybody that we made offers to came. I admit we didn't give offers to everybody. But about, I think, 70 out of 90 employees. I think of the 70 people we gave offers to, I think maybe 65 said yes. And uprooted their lives, relocated, moved to Seattle, all to suffer different fates of, from there, who knows. Some of them did great, some of them loved it, some of them hated it. You get the diversity of reactions you would expect. It was wonderful. Wizards changed dramatically, the merging of these 2 cultures. It's like any country, even here in Finland. I've been running around with Timo last few days, and everybody teases him about being from up north. You know, a country has different cultures, and so you had Seattle culture and the Milwaukee Midwest culture, very different cultures. But we made it work, and we immediately, the day after the acquisition, you know, let's start working on 3rd edition Dungeons and Dragons, and everybody's like, woo! So then we went through a long process of figuring out who should work on that, and eventually we had a really, I feel like we came up with a great solution. We were able to do 3rd edition mostly with TSR talent, but bringing in Jonathan Tweet, who I felt was, you know, I had to, at the end of the day, pick somebody who I knew really well to lead the effort. But also Monty Cook was on that team, Skip Williams, and really proud of 3rd edition Dungeons & Dragons, which we launched in 1999. With 3rd edition, I think, is the most successful edition of Dungeons & Dragons ever produced. Now, I'm not going to say the best. Everybody will have different opinions. We could have edition wars conversations in the bar later. But it sold really, really, really well. And then that sparked the whole D20 open gaming license, which brought new life into the role-playing game industry, and some challenges as it when it peaked and crashed later on down the road. So the D&D TSR acquisition was a great success for Wizards. We had, if you did a traditional business analysis of how much we spent versus how much profit the line made year over year, it might actually be a difficult case to prove as to whether or not we really made enough money in the short horizon to justify how much we paid for it. I think we might. I've never actually done the calculation. I've been a little nervous. But it was, the reason I know it worked out really well, aside from just the branding, what it gave Wizards of the Coast was when we sold Wizards to Hasbro later, the CEO of Hasbro told me he would not have been interested in buying Wizards of the Coast if it weren't for Dungeons & Dragons being a part of the deal. And trust me, that deal was worth it. And the reason is because that was the day that we went from being the Magic company to being a game company and being a leader in the hobby games industry. We also had some other fun things that happened about this time. We had, I told you earlier, I was foreshadowing earlier when I mentioned how well Magic was doing in Japan. In 1996, I think is fair to say, that it was 40% of our worldwide revenue was selling Magic in Japan. And then very soon after that, like 1997, 1998, kind of during the middle of buying TSR, I was at a meeting in Tokyo with our distributor for Magic, Hobby Japan, and the old guy, Mr. Sato, who was a dear friend, and he said, "Oh, Peter-san, so sad to tell you, Magic is no longer the #1 trading card game in Japan." What? I mean, by this time, we had seen a lot of other trading card games come into the market, you know, come in, survive for 1 or 2 expansions, and die. I mean, with the exception of Legend of the Five Rings, my good friend John Zinzer done a great job of that line. Except for Legend of the Five Rings, virtually every other trading card game would come to market and be dead within a year, maybe 2 years later. You know, Spellfire, I don't know, I'm not going to try to list a bunch of them off the top of my head. Anyway, and so by 1997, we were feeling pretty cocky. We're like, okay, we've seen a horde of imitators, and nobody has come close, and haven't heard anything from the sports guys. So, but you know, you're always afraid of that, right? And so when Mr. Sato says Magic is no longer the #1 trading card game in Japan, like I felt this instant, you know, like, oh, no, like just fear, like, oh, what's happened, right? And that's when I heard about Pokemon. So he showed me Pokemon, showed me the cartoons, showed me the Game Boys. And it's like, oh, like we were like the big man on campus. I don't know if that phrase translates well, but like until that moment, we were we're the giant of the industry, right? I'm buying TSR, Magic's kicking ass, and we're making tons of money, and you feel like a big guy. You feel like a big, successful company. And all we're doing, though, is printing cards. And then you realize that your competitor is Nintendo. Like, oh, shit. And so, okay. And then, for the next couple of months, it's like, oh my God, Pokemon, they're so evil. They're so like, oh my God, they're kicking our ass. Like, oh my God, oh my gosh. And then my head of Asian business, one of my executives, Rich Fukutaki, came to me and said, hey, the guy that invented Pokemon was inspired by Magic, of course. I mean, you couldn't have done Pokemon or Yu-Gi-Oh! Or any of these other trading card games, except that you were inspired by Magic. And he says, would we do him the honor of being his partner and selling Pokemon in the United States? So all of a sudden we went from, ooh, evil Pokemon, to, oh, yeah, that's a great idea. Yay, Pokemon! So we did. We became the Pokemon marketing and distribution partner for Nintendo and Pokemon in the United States, and we did a really good job of it. And we did such a good job that within a year from that launch, we had the rights to Pokemon in all countries other than Japan, in all languages except Japanese. And I should have done another sales chart because it just keeps going like the last one does. Magic is doing around $100 million a year in sales. Pokemon did in 2 years, in 1999, 2000, combined $1 billion. Thankfully, we had an earnout. But it was just crazy. I mean, I never dreamed 10 years earlier I'd be selling a game like Pokemon. But, but all my respect and love to the Pokemon people and Ishihara and all the people that believed in us for doing that game. I love Pikachu. Go Pikachu. So we also did a couple other things. We launched a Magic. So this gave us this growth period that we needed. And it was, and I've got 5 minutes, so I'm going to try and rush through the last part of this. So we, cut a long story short, back to this liquidity problem, we now became a very attractive acquisition target. And so we entered into negotiations in January of 1999 to sell Wizard of the Coast to Hasbro. And it took us 10 months to do the deal from that point until it was done. That's about right for this big of a deal. And it was a great deal for everybody. I mean, I got nothing bad to say about anybody involved in it. Hasbro gave us a very fair offer. There were some intricacies and some back and forth. It was complex, but we worked through everything. And it turned out, years later, looking back at that, I think everybody was happy with how it turned out. When we sold, and the shareholders, thank you, and the shareholders got their liquidity. I stayed on for 2 years, year and a half after the sale. I had been challenged by Alan Hassenfeld, the CEO. I says, how do you continue to grow? And I said, well, here's the plan. You got to go online gaming. World of Warcraft was not out yet. EverQuest was doing great. Said we need to do EverQuest with the Dungeons and Dragons brand. And we started working on it. We started pouring a lot of money into it, hired 25 people, built a development studio in Austin, Texas. and we're well on development. And if we would have gone on, we would have definitely been out before World of Warcraft, which probably would have kicked our ass. But who knows? Maybe we'd have done really well. I don't know. But in the middle of this, Hasbro decided to sell all the interactive rights to all their brands to Atari. And so I said, well, you don't need me, because I now no longer have a plan. I said, I don't know how to grow this company. There was no emotion to it, really. When I left, it just wasn't what I wanted to do any longer, and the vision that I had for how to grow the company wasn't. It wasn't supported, and I understand that, but I didn't have another answer. Like when I left Wizards of the Coast, it was like, I don't have a vision for where to go with this company. We can keep, I don't want to do a new edition of D&D when we just did one. And Magic's wired. You just keep coming out with expansions. If we do any other games that we did, we ended up canceling because their revenue would be so small compared to Magic that it didn't make sense. So I actually just kind of had this brain freeze. Like, I don't know what to do, so I'm going to go play. And so I kind of went and wandered in the wilderness for a while, trying to figure out what I would do next in my life, and eventually I would end up buying Gen Con. But that's tomorrow's presentation. So tomorrow we will pick up where we left off today. Do I have time for a question? You got the timekeeper up there. Until they kick me out. Okay, a question. Over here somewhere this time? Over here somewhere? Anybody got a question about anything we've covered so far? Yes? What happened to Robo Rally? Robo Rally got published, and it got reprinted. And then when Hasbro brought Wizards, a couple years later, Hasbro came out with more of a Hasbro-style version of Robo Rally, better board design and stuff like that. Is it not in print now?
I think it is.
It might still be in print. So, yeah, but a good thing to point out, the game that Richard first brought to me, Robo Rally, which I declined, we came back 2 years later and did it. And it's been one of those. Wizards did several games which probably collectively lost money in terms of revenue compared to how much time we spent on internal. And you're paying people full salaries and all this stuff. It just doesn't work. But I think helped give Wizards a great reputation for having great games other than just Magic and D&D and Pokemon. Yes?
Would you start a role-playing game company today?
Sure, but I wouldn't hire anybody. Yes?
Was going out to a Games Workshop actually a kind of option at some point?
Yes, sure. I mean, we were very interested. I went over there, and actually, they treated me really nice. I went over there, spent a couple of days with Tom Kirby. He let me sit in on a staff meeting, like top executive staff, just talking about whatever they would do on a normal Monday or whatever. But I also came away realizing that what I had been told, which is that the corporate culture was incredibly different. And as a public company, we would have to have paid too much money for them. So it's one of those situations where Games Workshop was doing too well at the time, and it would have been too expensive. And we didn't actually, and a lot more expensive than TSR. We would have had to have raised money, which we could have done, but it would have been a much more risky sort of thing to do. And I think the challenges of integrating the companies would have just been enormously complex. So it was a smart thing for us both to walk away from that conversation and have some fond memories. I think my time is up. So thank you all for having me.